land boundary terminus on the Indian Ocean coast to the outer limits of national jurisdiction. Madam President, stage one of the three-stage process, as the court is well aware, consists of constructing a provisional equidistance line, provided that construction of such a line is feasible and appropriate. Here, it is both. This is plain from the geographic setting. As you can see here, and at tab 45 of your judges' folders, the Indian Ocean coast in the vicinity of the land boundary terminus between Somalia and Kenya is remarkably straight and smooth, almost a straight line extending all the way from just south of the Horn of Africa in Somalia's northeast to just north of Kenya's border with Tanzania. The relevant coast, for the purpose of constructing the provisional equidistance line, lies within this long and remarkably straight coastline. The parties are in agreement in their definition of the relevant coast for purposes of this delimitation. They agree that Somalia's relevant coast extends from just north of Mogadishu southwestward to the land border with Kenya, a distance of some 733 kilometers, as shown on this slide and at tab 46. Kenya's relevant coast runs in the same direction, to the southwest, from the border with Somalia for a distance of approximately 511 kilometers until it reaches the border with Tanzania. Somalia initially measured Kenya's relevant coast at 400. Kenya complained in its rejoinder that Somalia left off 45 kilometers that should have been included. In the Black Sea case, the court held that only those portions of a party's coast that, quote, generate projections which overlap the projections of the coast of the other party, end quote, are, quote, considered as relevant for the purposes of the delimitation, end quote. This was the basis on which Somalia calculated the length of Kenya's relevant coast. However, to settle what is a minor discrepancy between the parties, Somalia is willing to accept Kenya's measurement of its own relevant coast. There is thus no dispute as to the relevant coasts of the two parties in this case. Madam President, as these slides show, the relevant coasts in the vicinity of the land boundary terminus are devoid of any obvious geographical features that might render the construction of an equidistance line infeasible or inappropriate. There are no significant peninsulas or coastal promontories, no significant concavities or convexities, and no offshore features to complicate or render difficult in any way the construction of an equidistance line. In short, the unremarkableness of the relevant coasts makes this a model case for the three-stage process and for the construction of a provisional equidistance line. To be sure, a closer look at these coasts reveals the presence of some small islands on both the Somalia side and the Kenya side of the border. On Somalia's side, here and at tab 47, you will find the Diua, the Mashiaka Islands, a few rocky islets less than half a nautical mile offshore, just to the south of a headland at Ras Kambuni. Kenya, too, has some small fringing islands immediately adjacent to the continental coast. They are shown here and at tab 48, specifically Kiungamwini and Simambaya Islands. Helpfully, none of these small, close-to-shore features has a significant impact on the direction of the provisional equidistance line, nor do any of them exert an effect on the line that causes prejudice to the other party in any way. To the contrary, Somalia's and Kenya's fringing islands balance each other. This is for two reasons. First, all of these features are very close to the continental coast, and they are largely aligned along it. As a result, they do not produce a significant change in the direction of the coast. Second, there are coastal base points from which the provisional equidistance line is drawn on both Somalia's Dhegaysiga Islands and Kenya's Kiungamwini Island, which offset each other. As in prior cases, the coastal base points are determined objectively using CARA software as applied to official large-scale charts. Somalia has used United States NGA Nautical Chart 61220 to identify all of the base points. The base points selected by the CARA software on the basis of U.S. NGA Nautical Chart 61220 are shown here and at tab 49. 4 are on Somalia's side, including 2 on the Dhegaysiga Islands and 3 on Kenya's side, including 1 on Kiungamwini Island. The relatively small number of base points is a reflection of the regularity of the relevant coast, which has very few turning points, all quite modest, and the absence of any significant indentations or concavities. From these base points, it is a mechanical exercise to construct a provisional equidistance line, which is also produced by the CARA software. As you can see here and at tab 50, the equidistance line is almost perfectly straight. In fact, it is perfectly straight over its final 262 miles out to the 350-mile limit from Kenya's coast. This, too, is a reflection of the virtually straight, unremarkable coastline from which it is drawn. Another way of showing this is by rendering the relevant coast as a perfectly straight line and drawing a perpendicular or bisector, intersecting it at the land boundary terminus. This is what an equidistance line would look like if the coast were perfectly straight. The similarity between the perpendicular and the actual equidistance line, shown here and at tab 51, is still further evidence of the regularity of the coast and the appropriateness of using the 3-stage equidistance-based methodology to delimit the maritime boundary. So what does Kenya have to say about this? In its counter-memorial and its rejoinder, Kenya said practically nothing. It did not propose an alternative chart, nor did it identify any coastal base points, nor did it construct an equidistance line, nor did it challenge the correctness of the base points identified or the equidistance line constructed by Somalia. That was where Kenya's case stood as of 5 March 2021, 11 days ago. On that date, as part of its application under Rule 56, Kenya submitted a 315-page legal memorandum, which it labeled Appendix 2, Volume 1. In that supplementary written pleading, Kenya challenged Somalia's depiction of the equidistance line for the first time. First, Kenya objected to Somalia's use of the official U.S. government chart of the Somalia-Kenya coast. It contended that British Admiralty Chart 3362 is more accurate and appended that chart to its pleading. Second, Kenya determined the appropriate base points from which to construct an equidistance line based on the British Admiralty chart and CARA software, and it supplied the coordinates of those base points. Third, it constructed its own provisional equidistance line. This slide, which is also at tab 52, shows the resulting equidistance line alongside Somalia's equidistance line, which we have superimposed on Kenya's chart. As you can see, there is very little difference between the two equidistance lines. And this further confirms the appropriateness of the 3-stage process and the construction of a provisional equidistance line in the first stage. Somalia expects that the court will determine for itself which chart and which sets of base points to use in constructing the equidistance line, as it and other international tribunals have done in prior maritime delimitation cases. Somalia trusts the court to perform this technical exercise and will be content with the outcome, whether the court uses the United States or the British Admiralty chart or another chart that it considers even more reliable. Despite the facility with which Kenya has now identified appropriate coastal base points and produced its own provisional equidistance line, it argues, in its belated legal pleading, that equidistance itself should be rejected because of the purported unreliability of the base points on its own coast. Kenya suggests that only a site visit can properly determine the location of these base points. This is a novel as well as untimely argument. Article 16 of UNCLOS provides, quote, the baselines for measuring the breadth of the territorial sea determined in accordance with Articles 7, 9, and 10, or the limits derived therefrom, and the lines of delimitation drawn in accordance with Articles 12 and 15, shall be shown on charts of a scale or scales adequate for ascertaining their position. Alternatively, a list of geographical coordinates of points specifying the geodetic datum may be substituted, end of quote. Somalia and Kenya itself have satisfied both of these alternative criteria. They have each drawn a line of delimitation based on the official charts of a neutral state, which are of such scale as to be adequate for ascertaining its position. And both Somalia and Kenya have provided a list of geographical coordinates of points specifying the geodetic datum. Nothing more is required. But even if Kenya's self-serving and unproven argument about unstable base points were tenable, which it is not, the solution would not be to resort to a parallel of latitude, no relation to the base points whatsoever, or in this case, to the actual direction of the coast. Instead, it would be to substitute a bisector for the equidistance line. Due to the unstable nature of the coast at the mouth of the Rio Coco, no reliable coastal base points could be determined. And as we saw a few moments ago, a bisector in this case, drawn from a straight line following the general direction of the relevant coast, closely approximates an equidistance line, whether drawn on the basis of United States NGA chart 61220 or British Admiralty chart 3362. Madam President, as Professor Miron explained, and as you can see directly from each of these depictions, this is not only an emblematic case for use of that methodology. If that methodology were not appropriate here, in the particularly unremarkable geographical circumstances of this case, it would be difficult to envision a situation where it should be applied. There is one technical issue, however, regarding stage one of the three-stage process that remains to be addressed. This concerns the starting point for the provisional equidistance line. Somalia contends that the equidistance line, and indeed any boundary line that could be drawn, must begin on the coast, at the low water line. Somalia's position conforms to Article 5 of UNCLOS, which states that the, quote, normal baseline for measuring the breadth of the territorial sea, and thus the starting point of any delimitation, is the low water line. Surprisingly, Kenya disagrees. It contends that the maritime boundary should begin on land, some 40 meters inland from the coast, at boundary pillar 29. The parties agree that boundary pillar 29 is the final marker on the land boundary between Somalia and Kenya before the boundary reaches the sea. Its precise geographic coordinates were disputed in the written pleadings, and Kenya again complains in the legal memorandum it submitted on 5 March a unique situation. It was common practice for colonial authorities, such as those from Italy and the United Kingdom, who demarcated this land boundary too close to the